Welcome to our discussion of Know Your Commentaries, a three-part series on various commentaries. The first installment is Rashbam versus Rashi. We want to understand the methodology of Rashi, and we'll do it on the backdrop of Rashbam's critique of Rashi. So, of course, Rashi lives in the 11th century, France, and he has a grandson, Rashbam. He has daughters. One of the daughters is married to a rabbi, Rav Meir, and Rashbam is the grandson. Rashi is the famous commentary on the entire Tanakh and the entire Talmud, and Rashbam has his commentary just on the Chumash, the Pentateuch, and on some of the Talmud as well. Now, Rashi's methodology is never laid out in an introduction because that wasn't his style to write an introduction. But in Genesis 3:8, he does say that when it says that Adam and Eve heard the voice of God coming through the Garden of Eden, and then they were afraid and they put on clothes and all that. So he says, Yesh midrashei agadah rabim. There are a lot of agadot, a lot of stories, midrashim, that you could bring to bear on this verse, that they heard angels, different things. If you want, you can look them up in the Genesis Rabbah and the Midrash Rabbah or other Midrashim. So he comes and he says, programmatic statement, you know what I'm here for? I'm not here to tell you every Midrash. I'm only coming to the simple meaning of the text, and also to tell you about Agadah, about Midrash, which can explain the verse, and explain a difficult verse, as long as everything is on its heels. In other words, as the wheels are on the bus, as long as it fits in with the words. So therefore, Vayishmu, what does it mean that they heard God? You can't hear God walking through the garden. God has no body. Shamu kol HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They heard the voice of God. The voice was walking through the garden. You can say that a voice is walking. It's okay. So that's what he says. Now, there is a midrash like that as well. So he chose that version of midrash because he thinks that works out well with the verse. Now, many people were confused by Rashi because they say Rashi's like 85% midrash. Half of what he's not half of what he said, 85% of what he says is simply a midrash. So how can he say that he's only coming to explain the simple meaning of the text? It's not the simple meaning. Take, for instance, the idea that Moses' mother, his stepmother, stretched out her arm. So it says she sent out for her amot, which is her maidservants, and the rabbi says she stretched out her arm became hundreds of feet long. Rashi mentioned that. What does that got to do with the simple meaning of the text? How can Rashi be simple meaning of the text when he's constantly quoting the Midrash? So the answer is, he's not reading what Rashi says. Rashi says that he's here for the simple meaning and for Midrashim, which can answer questions in the text. Rashi uses that midrashic method. Why does it say this? Why does it say something else? Why does he use this phrase? Why does he use that phrase? And if you don't have an answer in this from the top of your head, then you can use the midrash to answer those questions that explain things. And that explains Rashi's philosophy a little bit better. Rashi, I didn't realize till recently, my daughter Rachel pointed out from her class with Dr. Levine, that actually Rashi does have an introduction, not on Genesis or on this Torah comedy, but his introduction to Shir HaShirim. Because the Song of Songs is very complicated. Because not to use Midrash for Shir HaShirim, you're going to it's going to be a pornographic novel. You're going to be explaining the love story between two people. So that's the simple meaning of the text. But that's not the simple meaning of the text. We didn't codify the Song of Songs to be in our canon of holy books to tell a love story. The purpose of Shir HaShirim is some sort of allegory. So then you can use Midrash. So where does his program of using the simple meaning of the text, how does that fit in? So he says, look, firstly, God spoke one, but we hear two things. There are a lot of different levels in which you can interpret the text. Rashi's very into that. There are a lot of meanings. One verse can mean different things. Basically, in the end, nothing can go out of its simple meaning. But the Torah uses metaphors. And the entire Song of Songs is one big metaphor. Even the metaphor has to be done within its context. It has to flow. You can't say that this verse is talking about the Exodus, and this verse alludes to Adam and Eve, and this verse alludes. Well, you got to go in order. If we're gonna have a series of metaphors, the metaphors should have some form to it, some sense. So we need to make a metaphor that flows better. So Rashi tells us about the notion of the multiplicity of meanings, and also that even when you deal with metaphor, the metaphor itself has to fit in. And this is very appropriate. Now, the Rashbam claims that Rashi failed in his notion. Rashbam seems focused on this idea that Rashi's there to explain the simple meaning. And Rashbam looks at Rashi's commentary, his grandfather's commentary, and he says, "It's not the simple meaning. Half of it's midrash." So the Rashbam says, and also my father Shlomo, my mother's father of blessed memory, the brilliant exegete who wrote commentaries on the entire Bible, was careful not to ignore the plain meaning of the text. I, Samuel, son of Meir, Rashi's son-in-law, Meir was Rashi's son-in-law, have argued with him, and he admitted to me that if he had the opportunity, he would compose an additional commentary in which he would concentrate on the plain meaning as it became clear to him with each passing day, or using the pshatot, the simple meanings, which renew themselves every day. This is an interesting idea, that the simple meaning of the text is not so simple, as Chaim Angel said in his book called Simple Meaning. Pshat is not so simple. You might think that the simple meaning of the text is simple. You translate it and you're done. No, there are simple meanings of the text which are raising their head every day. When you learn it, you have one simple meaning. I learn it the next day, I have a different meaning. I learn it the next day, and I myself have different meanings that I come up with. Even pshat is a flourishing field. Look at today at the Gush Etzion and other places; they're coming up with new interpretations all the time. Throughout the ages, it's been shown. I took courses with Dr. Steiner at YU, who showed that for centuries they thought that this verse meant one thing, and then all of a sudden, one of the commentators says, "No, you can read it the other way. It's a new idea." Even the simple meaning comes up every day. But getting back to the main idea, so Rashbam believes that if Rashi had his druthers, if he had more time, if he lived forever, he would write another commentary. Notice he wouldn't cancel the first commentary, but he'd write one commentary that was just the simple meaning of the text. Now, how seriously to take Rashbam, that really Rashi sort of, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to write such a midrashic commentary," or whether, that was just the grandson's interpretation. This is an interesting question. One could say that, look, Rashi knew what he was doing. He did what he did. But rather, Rashbam has its own program. Rashbam is interested in the simple meaning of the text, period. Rashi had a different program. He told us already. His program is the simple meaning plus the midrashim, which answer questions in the text. Now, for instance, if you want to see the difference between Rashi and Rashbam, we look at the beginning of the Akedas Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac. We know that this unbelievable story that Abraham was asked to sacrifice his son on the altar. So, but the story begins by saying, and after these words, God tested Abraham. So we wonder, what do you mean after these words? So if you're not that punctilious, you say, whatever, after the previous story, whatever. Story about the Philistines. Why is that important? That's not important. But that's not how a Jew reads the Torah. Every phrase is important. So if you say after these things, it must have been connected to those things. So Rashi says, well, some rabbis in the Gemara and the Talmud in Sanhedrin 89, they say that after the words of the Satan, just like in the book of Job, the Satan says, you think Job is righteous? What if you would make him suffer? Then what would happen? So too, the Satan said to God regarding Abraham that, look, Abraham had a son. He made him a great drinking banquet and party, and doesn't say that he brought any sacrifices. So what kind of servant is he? So God says he only made the party for his son. if I would ask him to give his son to me, I'll bet you he would give him to me. Let me show you. And we had the binding of Isaac to prove how righteous he is. Other people say it's against Ishmael. Ishmael says, look, I gave my I had a bris milah when I was 13 years old. You think that wasn't hard? You're nothing. So he says, what? You were willing to give up one part of your body? I'll give up my whole body for God. And that's the story of the binding of Isaac. So that's what Rashi says. Now, where did Rashi get that from? Midrash. How do we know these conversations took place? How do we know what the Satan said? How do we know that Ishmael was saying this to Isaac? We don't know that. We know it from outside the Bible itself. In the Bible, you know all we know? The previous story. So Rashbam said, oh, well, the previous story is Avimelech. And what did happen to Avimelech? That Abraham made a covenant with Avimelech. How dare he make a covenant with Avimelech? That means that when Joshua comes to conquer the land, he's not going to conquer Avimelech's territory. That territory is included in the book of Joshua as part of where the Jews are supposed to live. So that's terrible. So as a result of Abraham's sin of making a covenant with the Philistines, giving away parts of the land of Israel, as a result, God was angry at this high-handed action by Abraham. They had given away lands which were part of God's promise for the covenant of parts. So therefore, Abraham was punished with this terrible punishment that he had to offer his son. Why? Because he dared to give away parts of the land of Israel to make a deal with the Philistines that, when generations to come, we're not going to attack you. What do you mean? God told him to conquer the land of Israel. So the Rashbam says, hey, we only have the text. After these things means after the previous story. What was the previous story? God made a covenant with the Philistines. The Torah doesn't say it was good or bad, but then the Torah said, no, after that, God tested Abraham. God said, God sort of reproved Abraham. He was mad at Abraham. He said, Abraham, how could you do this? Bring your son as a sacrifice. And he was punished for that. So it's a completely different reading, kind of strange kind of an idea. People who are against peace processes and things often use this Rashbam. But notice, Rashi thinks that you can answer questions in the text, like, after what things? What did Abraham do wrong? He made a deal with the Philistines. They were nice to him. He said, okay, great. You don't bother me. I don't bother you. You and our grandchildren will all be friends. Kumbaya. What's the problem? Rashi didn't see anything in the text to answer the question. He says, if you don't have anything in the text to answer the question, you know how you answer the question? Midrash. Why not? I'm a believing Jew. Midrash says it. Why not? But the Rashbam says that's not pshat. The simple meaning of the text has to come from the text. The solution must be right there. And the only conclusion is he never should have made a covenant with the Philistines. So this seems to be the crux of the argument between Rashi and Rashbam. Do all answers need to come from inside the text, or can you use Midrash to answer questions within the text? Where Rashi agrees with Rashbam is that we're here to answer questions in the text. The Midrash is only significant if it answers questions in the text. If the Midrash is just some floating Midrash that's about pie in the sky, we're not going to talk about that because there's no question in the text. We're going to talk about Midrash, which answers questions in the text. Then we say, does Rashi always follow the simple reading? What about Exodus 2:23? I mean, it can't be anything less simple than this. It says that the king of Egypt died, and the Israelites were groaning under the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry for help rose up to God. So Rashi says, I don't understand. The king of Egypt died. Was he a good guy or a bad guy? He was a bad guy. And the Israelites were groaning. Wait a second. The king died, the wicked witch is dead, and the Wizard of Oz, they started singing. They don't start groaning. So why would they be sad that the king died? So it's a question in the text, and the answer he gives from Midrash. He was a fellow. He became stricken with leprosy. He didn't die at all. There's a midrashic idea, Talmudic idea that if you're a leper, it's such a bad condition. It's as if you're dead. So we don't mean, God forbid, that you shouldn't exist. But we're saying we sympathize with you. It's such a terrible thing. Certain conditions are so bad, it's almost like being dead. And we have to help people. We feel bad for you. So since he had leprosy, it's as if he's dead. So he died. And then what did he do? he said, well, how do I get rid of my leprosy? Oh, I know, if I kill a lot of Jewish babies, I'll soak in their blood, and then that'll cure my disease. So when he died, translation, had leprosy, the Jews groaned because he killed a lot of Jewish babies. Now, is that the simple meaning of the text? So the answer is it's not the simple meaning of the text, but it answers a question in the text. My professor, Professor Tuito of blessed memory, taught at a lot of places, including Yeshiva University for visiting professor. He was a great expert on Rashi, and he said, you know what Rashi's methodology is? It's not a methodology at all. It's just whenever he sees a medrash, it's too cute, too good to miss, he throws it in. Some people might want to say that he's alluding to his times. The people feel the Crusades are coming to attack us. They want us to convert Christianity, and many Jews sort of jumped off the roof to avoid converting to Christianity. And the Jews are feeling very despondent. A lot of Jews died in the Crusades. Whole communities were killed. So he says, yeah, he's just like the Pharaoh. Pharaoh killed the Jewish babies. Maybe he's trying to sort of sympathize with Jews at that time. So maybe he has an agenda of mentioning this particular midrash. We then turn to the very first Rashi in the Chumash. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Bereshit bara Elokim. So there's a problem. So Rashi starts off by saying, this verse is shouting out for midrash. It says, make a midrash for me. Make a midrash for me. Why is the verse shouting out? Because the problem is, there's no word bereshit. There's no word reshit that's not connected to something else. It's like saying the father of. Oh, I went to the father of. Father of what? In the father of, he created heaven and earth. Father of what? In the beginning of, he created heaven and earth. The beginning of what? So he says, this verse is screaming out from Midrash. In other words, Rashi's theory is, when there's a big problem in the text, you have to go to Midrash to answer the question. So the rabbis say, oh, it doesn't mean in the beginning of, it means for, is for, in, not in, but for, Reshit. Reshit means the first thing. What's the first thing? Torah. The Torah is the first thing. It's the first wisdom. It's Israel. Israel is the first. So for Torah and for Israel, God created the world. He says, if you want to interpret it the simple way, you'd say like this: in the beginning of the creation of heaven and earth, the earth was nothing. But it's not that first God created heaven and earth, and then the earth. No, it doesn't. That's not what it's talking about. This is not the order of creation, because we haven't described the creation yet. That comes on the first day. So it's rather, in the beginning there was nothing. So here we have the two levels. Remember, Rashi said that the Torah could be, it's like a rock that you break and it goes into different pieces. The Torah can be understood in 70 ways, in two different ways, a lot of ways. So there's the simple meaning, the midrashic meaning. But you say, how could Rashi start his commentary, which is supposed to be the simple meaning of the text, with a midrash? The answer is that the midrash is not the very first Rashi, but it's the first word that he explains. The midrash is okay, as again his program is that if there's a problem in the text, you can answer it with midrash. If the midrash helps us answer a problem, it's a great midrash. Rashbam would go nuts. He would think that's insane. You can't use midrash to explain the simple meaning. There's two different frameworks. It's like two different fields. There's a field of midrash and the field of simple meaning. Again, let's be very clear. Rashbam is a rabbinic Jew. Rashbam believes in the Talmud. He believes in all the rabbinic interpretations. But he says there's a separate field. Rashi invented the field. It's called the simple meaning of the text. And your job is to give that simple meaning. And that you're not allowed to use midrash in a simple meaning class. In a simple meaning class, you must use simple meaning. Good. There's a text, another example of Rashi using midrash to answer questions is the story of Moses being found. So Batya, the daughter of Pharaoh, finds Moses, and she opens and she sees him, the child. And behold, he's crying. She felt bad about him. She said he must be Jewish. So it says she opened the basket, and she sees him, the child. Doesn't make sense. You don't say him, the child. You don't say the pronoun and the noun. You either use a pronoun or you use the noun. You use the antecedent. You don't use the antecedent and the pronoun. You don't need it. I saw him, my brother. No, you say I saw my brother. I saw him. You don't say I saw him, my brother. So what's going on? So Rashi says, who did she see? She saw the son, the child. She saw him, and then the verse explains, who did she see? The child. That's the simple meaning. That although the verse is somewhat difficult, the answer is very simple. Yes, it says, I saw him, my brother. I saw him, my brother. Sometimes, for some reason, I wanted to say that. Well, okay, you can say that. But the Midrash, Rashi says, is that she saw the Shekhinah with him. She saw the divine presence with him. She opens and she saw him, and she saw the child. She saw the divine presence and the child. She said, oh, divine presence. If the God is with the child, it must be one of the Hebrew children. Again, since the Midrash is there to answer a simple question in the text, it's a legitimate interpretation. Again, according to Professor Tweeto, it's too cute not to mention it. Of course, it's not only cute, but as Professor Tweeto pointed out, Rashi is rich by giving all these midrashim. It's a rich kind of thing. He thought that the story of the Satan and the and Ishmael was a rich kind of thing, much richer than Rashbam. And here as well, the idea that when the baby's being thrown into the wolves, and all of a sudden he's saved, she's not. When you see the baby, she didn't see the baby; she saw God. God was protecting this baby. God was with this baby. It's a very deep and beautiful kind of a thing. And that's Rashi. Rashi's beautiful. And that's why Rashbam, you can find his commentary and it's very nice. But Rashi is what we live on, because in Rashi, there's beauty and there's message and there's something for our soul there. And that's what Rashi's all about. He's not just there for the simple meaning of the text. He's also a teacher and a pedagogue, and he's trying to inspire us. By the way, what is pshat? And what does it mean, the simple meaning of the text? And what's drash? Well, in drash, you often inject something supernatural. You want to see as many miracles as possible. In simple text, whatever miracle you see. Whatever you didn't see. You can't throw extra miracles in the text. Even Ezra was particularly opposed to that. How can you, if there's a miracle, why wouldn't the Torah mention it? So that's one thing, that you injecting too much supernatural things into a text, that's midrashing. So again, Rashbam might argue that throwing in that she saw the divine presence with Moses, that's a miracle not mentioned explicitly in the text. You can't just throw it in. Midrash is also to use secondary meanings of the word, that, as we just saw, that Reshit could refer sometimes to the Jews. So in the beginning is Israel, and Torah is called beginning, then it refers to the Jews. That'd be a secondary meaning of a word. And Midrash fills in the gap. As we saw, after these words, which words? So we fill in the gap. But again, Rashbam would say you can't fill in the gap with something that's not in the text. And one thing in Midrash is that you learn from extra words, that if there's a word that could have said it a different way, then you say, why did it say it this way? It said it this way to teach me a new lesson. Rashbam would say, an extra word, so it's an extra word, big deal. Sometimes when you speak, you write something, you write in a flowery way, and there are extra words. The Ibn Gaspi is particularly big on this. Or even in the Talmud, you have Dibra Torah Lashon Bnei Adam. Sometimes the Torah will say, so it says, he shall surely die. In Hebrew, it's Mot Yumat. So it says die twice, Mot and Yumat. He shall surely die. If someone deserves a death penalty, he shall surely die. Why does it say surely? Why does it say Mot Yumat? He shall die. Why does it say it twice? So some rabbis say, the Torah speaks in a certain language. That's how you talk in Hebrew. It's double. But other rabbis, Rabbi Akiva, he says, wait a second, we have to make a midrash out of it, because when there are extra words, you've got to find something. Rashi seems to believe that, yes, if there are extra words, then that's an opening for midrash. In that case, I'm open to midrash. For instance, and Jacob feared greatly, and he was troubled. Vayira Yaakov Ma'od, vayetzer lo. It's the same thing. If he feared, he was troubled. It's the same thing. So they say, oh, he was afraid that he would be killed. After all, Esav is very strong. And he felt badly. Why did he feel bad? He was afraid he'd have to kill Esav, or anybody Esav sent to kill him. He would have to kill him. He felt bad about that too, which is an interesting thing. If you're defending yourself, do you have to feel bad about killing someone else? Here, Rashi is giving a very high moral level. You say, yes. For instance, Jews today are defending themselves in the land of Israel. Should you feel bad about people who are killed in the process? Rashi would say, yes, we do. Doesn't mean that we don't go out and fight with all of our strength to defend the land of Israel. But people killed in the process, we feel bad about that. We wish they wouldn't have attacked on October 7th. They wouldn't have to kill anybody. As Jews, we must be concerned about both sides of killing and also being killed, but also killing others as well, even someone like Esav, who are certainly no great fans of his. So why is that legitimate? Because Rashi would say that's a simple meaning. Because I don't understand. Why does it say it twice? Rashbam or someone else might say, So describing different emotions. He had several emotions. He was fearful. He was very troubled. It's not a problem. There's no question in the text. It's simply a double language of various ideas. Now, why does Rashi give you both? Why does he give you both? So again, we said we have different theories. One theory is, why does Rashi very often give both simple meaning and midrash? If he wants to come for the simple meaning, why doesn't he just leave it with that? So you could say Professor Tweedo's theory is that Rashi can't resist. He just, I can't resist. It's such a wonderful midrash. I have to include this in my commentary. Sometimes you're writing something and you're really writing about this, but you can't resist writing something else. So you put it in a footnote, or you write it. So even as he tells you the simple meaning, sometimes he also tells you midrash because it's just so good he can't resist. According to that, Rashi has no methodology at all. Could say that Rashi wants to give the simple meaning, but he also has an agenda. He's a Baal Musar. He wants to give moral lessons to people. He's a teacher. He's an educator. He wants to give you certain lessons and messages. He wants to tell you, put down a program of what midrash should people know, important to know. So maybe he's trying to comfort people in a difficult time that he lived, the historical reasons. So there are many theories as to why Rashi sometimes includes both pshat and drash. The one example of this Rashi functioning purely as a Baal Musar, as an ethical preacher, is Leviticus 5:17. There it says, talking about sacrifices, if someone should sin and he does one of the mitzvahs that should not be done, and he didn't realize it, and he's guilty, he carries his sin, and he should bring a guilt offering. So, for instance, there are certain fats on the animal, on the kidneys, and the things that you shouldn't eat. So he thought it was regular fat, and he didn't realize it was the kidney fat. So he has to bring a guilt offering for it. This whole sacrifice, the whole animal has to be brought. So Rashi says, it quotes all kinds of midrashim. For instance, there are like three different rabbis who talk about this. So one of them says, for instance, Yosef clearly says, see, the scripture punishes him who has no sure knowledge that he has sinned. How much more does it follow that he will punish him who does know that he's sinning and yet willfully does it? He says, the Torah says that if you didn't know what you were doing, you'll bear your sin. You mean even people who don't know what they're doing, they bear a sin? If you know what you're doing, can you imagine how much sin there is? Here's someone who has to bring a sacrifice because he ate the wrong fats. He thought he was eating kosher fat, and turned out it was not kosher fat. He has to bring a sin offering. What about somebody who knows he's eating non-kosher fat and he eats it anyway? Or other sins that people do and they know what they're doing and they do it anyway. They must have a terrible suffering. Now, is this trying to answer some kind of question in the text? Is there a problem in the text? Is there a problem? Rashi just wants to give you an ethical message. Rashi is a teacher and a preacher, not just an explanation of the simple meaning. He's not simply setting out with a program to explain the simple meaning. That's Rashbam's job. That's Ibn Ezra's job, but not Rashi. He has ethical preaching he wants to share as well. So what makes him tick? In summary, Was he influenced by the simple interpreters of the Bible in the secular world at that time? There's a theory that there was a sort of a medieval Renaissance or the early Renaissance, not the Renaissance that everyone talks about, but there was a little Renaissance in the 11th century in the German world, in the Latin world, and so maybe he was influenced by that. They were interested in simple text. Second possibility, we know that his grandson Rashbam sometimes would say, when I was asked this question by the Christians in such and such city, I told them such and such. So maybe Rashi also was troubled. The local Monsignor, the local priest may have also said, hey, Rashi, what about this verse? Now, when you're arguing with a Christian, if you say, oh, that verse, well, the Midrash explains that it's talking about this. So they'll say, oh, so the Midrash says it's talking about that. We say it's talking about Jesus. But what if you said, oh, no. Torah must be explained in the simple meaning. So when it says that Jacob crossed his hands, it can't be referring to any crosses because it's a simple meaning. There's no extra symbolism. It's just a simple meaning. So sometimes when you want to dialogue with the Christians, it's better to argue on the level of the simple meaning, because if you get to midrashic meaning, they'll have their own quote unquote midrash, their own reinterpretation of the text to prefigurations of various sorts. Well, they'll see Jesus in every story that they can. So perhaps it's an anti-Christian kind of a methodology. And that would explain why it cropped up at this particular moment in history. There was just one moment in history where people were interested in the simple meaning, and then it seems to die out. I mean, the medieval rabbis after about 1500, nobody's that interested in the simple meaning. We Jews, we study Midrash. So why all of a sudden the simple meaning? Maybe he was trying to deal with the Christians. We gave the theory of Professor Tweedo. We repeated over and again that maybe he just couldn't resist to say certain things. Was he trying to discourage Jews? That on certain occasions, he's saying, look, the Jews are great. The whole Torah is written for you. The whole world was created for you. Is he just trying to encourage Jews? And then you say, what's the question? What's the question here? Why does Rashi give so many midrashim? He's a rabbinic Jew. He gives you the simple meaning, which is an interesting project, and he gives you the rabbinic meaning. It's not a question. And we said that maybe he's interested. He has a double motive. He wants to give you the simple meaning plus any midrashim that can answer questions in the simple meaning of the text. And Professor Tweedo says he tried to bring about the spirit of the ages, of the sages, in a rational way to those swayed by the Renaissance in the 12th century. Professor Tweedo wants to claim that at that time there were Jews who were just like the modern Renaissance sort of took some Jews away from Judaism. That Renaissance also people were saying, oh, there's such interesting stuff being said now, so much interesting intellectual fervor going on. That's interesting. The new rational world, not so interested in the rabbis anymore. He says, no, I'm going to give you a rational reading of the text, not midrashic, a rational reading, and this will keep these Jews away from these dangerous kind of ideas. So those are some theories about what makes Rashi tick and what Rashi's all about. And we contrast it with Rashbam, who has a very narrow agenda as to what he is setting out to do, and Rashbam, much broader agenda. So we thank you for joining us here at the Baron Hirsch Congregation. This was part of a Shabbos afternoon lecture, and we dedicate this to our sponsors this month for our webcast. That is to Karen, Barney, Abbas, memory of wonderful patrons of our shul, members of our shul, Miriam and Harry Cooper, and the memories be a blessing. Thank you for joining us.